Hello everyone, this is Laruga, and today I want to take a look at forward bending. So forward bending is very prominent in the Ashtanga Yoga primary series, and I think it's really important that we take a look at forward bending for the long term. So our bodies do not overstretch in certain areas, and we have good structure in the pose to be able to do the practice of forward bending for the long term. So what I want to take a look at first is the very first posture of primary series, which is known as Dandasana, and then going into Paschimottanasana with both hand positions that we work with there, and then also taking some time to look at the poses where there's one leg extended forward and the other leg working in another position, whether that's the Janushirsasanas or Marchasanas. It's so important to kind of understand how that extended leg works whenever you forward bend. So one common area of complaint with forward bending is hamstring attachment issues. And so it is really important that we learn how to avoid that hamstring attachment issue, especially through the upper part of the hamstring. Sometimes people do complain of hamstring issues more in the attachment area behind the knee. And these are things that can be avoided if we do our forward bends with really good technique and good support. And even though for some of you the goal may be to obtain greater flexibility, we need to think, slowly over time, that it doesn't have to happen overnight. It doesn't even have to happen through big leaps through several months. But this is something where we have to obtain a sense of trust in our own bodies, because what I've learned is if we push too hard, too soon, too fast, the body will contract to protect itself. So this is where we have to practice really good breathing and, of course, good technique, good support, so the body does feel secure to go into a deeper stretch over time. So first, like I said before, let's take a look at Dandasana. And this is going to be a pose that's quite simple, but there's a lot happening here. So again, the first pose in the Ashtanga Yoga primary series, and it's also sometimes known as staff pose. So when we do Dandasana, we have both hands to either sides of our hips. The arms are straight, the shoulders roll back, the chest lifts as the chin drops. And what's really important here is also how we activate the legs, because the legs that we do in Dandasana are similar to what we do in all forward bending poses. And this is an important technique to understand. So when we do stretch, there's proper activation to create support and action in the body, so we don't overstretch certain areas. So the feet should be very active. We want the heels to be grounded into the floor, and also the quadriceps engaged. However, there's a balance. So you never want to over-engage your quadriceps in a way that the heels lift off the floor. So to create a balance, the heels are grounded as they also engage the quadricep muscles. And the hands, again, like I mentioned earlier, rest to the outside of my hips. The arms are straight, which helps to elongate the waist. And as I elongate the waist, I should have a lift through the pelvic floor and through Mula Bandha, and also a lift through Uddiyana Bandha. So again, I'm learning how to support myself through my core in this position. And so the chest lifts as the chin drops. The drishti is resting right on the tip of the nose, and breathing here. So everything is very active without being overtly tense. So everything alive through the line of my legs, everything alive through the sides of my waist, as I also am conscious of my breathing here. Okay, so very active legs, and again, finding that support through the core, through the action of the bandhas. So after we do 5 breaths in Dandasana, we then transition into Paschimottanasana A. And so when we do so, we take the big toes and we inhale, 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 creating a lot of space in the body to then fill that space as we fold into the position. And so I maintain that activation of my legs as I fold into the pose. Now, one thing I recommend is that I mentioned earlier that sometimes this hamstring attachment issue is something that many complain about in the practice at some point, possibly. And I was really lucky when early on in the practice, I had a teacher who was very adamant about engaged legs, and I never had a hamstring attachment issue, luckily. So there's something to keep in mind here is that in Ashtanga Yoga, you don't want to spread all of this out. So you don't want to spread out the glutes and then take the hamstrings out to prepare to fold forward. I know in some ways it feels better. However, I tend to recommend that there's more of this drawing in, like there should be a sense of drawing inward as you stretch forward. So there's a sense of support and drawing in as you go into the stretch, that we inhibit or avoid that overstretching in this area. And again, you will get more flexible slowly over time, but we don't have to manipulate these areas by spreading things out in a way where there's a tendency to overstretch that hamstring attachment. So again, I recommend, even energetically, feeling as if the sit bones are drawing together. Of course, the bones don't necessarily move, but that's just a visualization that I give. Sit bones drawing together as you go into the stretch. And of course, I continue to lift through my thighs and I ground the heels down. Another important aspect is a lift through Mula Bandha and Uddiyana Bandha. So I don't necessarily need to just expand my ribs forward and try to be as flat as possible. I actually want to feel that there's a nice healthy lift through here as I go into the forward fold. Now, of course, everybody is going to start their forward bending journey in a different space. Some people might be more naturally flexible, others might be very hyper stable. I like to say that instead of stiff. So if you have a lot of hyperstability, you might need to kind of think to expand here as you fold forward. And there's going to be varying degrees that you might work into the forward fold. If you have very short hamstrings, or if the back tends to really round as you go forward, sometimes a slight bend to the knees is really good as you start to work yourself forward. Sometimes it depends on the body type or the student. Sometimes I might recommend that they keep the legs straight and just kind of have some support to where they can feel long through the back and come out of this sense of really, really rounding too much, where the shoulders kind of hunch up toward the ears. And for those that have more mobility, it's important that we don't just think that we need to flatten as much as possible. That actually, if you've been practicing for a while, it's better to get a little bit of a lift here as you keep the legs very active, working into the forward fold. So again, with these options, when it comes to forward folding, it's good to think long instead of deep, especially if you're a little bit hyperstable or tighter in the body. So for instance, if there's a tendency for the pelvis to really roll back this way and you're kind of feeling like it's hard to get any type of action forward, I recommend a slight bend to the knees so the pelvis can either point up or it can also go into a slightly forward position, to then either take the big toes if you can reach, or if you have to take the ankles, and then just kind of folding into the pose, moving the shoulders away from the ears. For others, if it's not so much a tilting back of the pelvis, but still having a limited range of motion, which is absolutely okay. It's not a contest. Like if you have limited range of motion, there's no worries. Things will progress slowly over time. It's really all the other attributes of yoga that are the true reward here, not necessarily being as flat as possible. So again, for certain body types, I always recommend get those shoulders away from the ears. If you're unable to catch the big toes, that's okay. You can bend the knees, or you can take whatever part of the leg that you can take and use that to find some extension, still finding that lift through Mula Bandha and Uddiyana Bandha and breathing here. For those of you that have been practicing for a while or maybe a little bit deeper, we inhale, and we exhale, fold. But again, I don't have to be super flat because sometimes you can start to get some hip issues if you're too flat and you don't have enough support in the bandha area. So it is important to create a little bit of rounding here. And again, it always depends on where you are in your body, like to what degree you are folding forward. That will, and this is again why it's so important to have some guidance from a teacher to know what to do at different degrees that you're working with in the practice. So again, for me, I'm always going to work the shoulders away from the ears, the front of my throat really open, the back, the neck also open, because there's a tendency to really do something like this, where, sometimes when I'm working with students, I don't see their neck. And so I'm often like, okay, let me see that neck. Let me see it present in the body. So we want to feel that there's an elongation through here. Okay, so shoulders working back, a lift through Mula Bandha and Uddiyana Bandha, and the legs stay engaged. When I come out of Paschimottanasana, I want to inhale, create a lot of space, and then exhale. For the second hand position, I can either catch my wrist, or you can just take the sides of the feet if that's the range that you're working with, and then exhale. Of course, the second hand position is going to be a little bit deeper, whether I take the wrist or the sides of the feet. I still want that lift through Mula Bandha and Uddiyana Bandha, and I still want to keep the legs engaged, including the feet. And again, back through here, I'm thinking drawing in instead of splaying out. Now that sense of splaying out and moving the hamstrings out or the flesh of the glutes out, that might work for other methods of yoga. But in Ashtanga Yoga, especially primary series, because we do so many forward bending poses, I really do not recommend taking the flesh outward. I recommend more drawing the flesh inward instead, so you have good support there. So the same thing will apply, for instance, if I work with Marichyasana A or with Janu Shirshasana A, or other positions where the leg is extended outward. I still want to keep that nice engaged leg, just like I represented in Dandasana. That is so important. And again, that sense of drawing in and lifting through the bandha, so I have good support through my low back, keeping this leg engaged, because again, an engaged leg is a supported leg. And then when I engage my quadricep, it helps to release the hamstring in a really healthy way. So whether you're catching the wrist or taking the sides of the feet, keeping the leg nicely engaged. So these are just a few tips to remember. If you have any questions or further requests for discussions on postures or techniques in the practice of Ashtanga Yoga, do let me know and leave a comment. Thank you.